Darnell Jackson made $69,000 a year as a senior commercial electrician. It was good, honest money earned in the guts of Nashville's gleaming new skyscrapers, running conduit and pulling wire that powered the city's relentless growth. He was proud of his work, of the skill in his hands, and the sweat on his brow. But sitting in the plush, oversized leather chair in the private dining room of Kane Prime Steakhouse in the Gulch, he felt like a fraud. The air, thick with the scent of dry-aged beef and expensive perfume, seemed to choke him. Across the table, his wife Whitney was holding court, her voice a smooth, confident melody that wrapped around her colleagues and family, holding them captive. It was a matter of seeing the opportunity where no one else did, she was saying, gesturing with a hand that wore a $15,000 diamond ring Darnell had financed over 3 years. The quarterly projections were flat, and my director was looking for a miracle. I went back through our latent client portfolios, found a dormant account with massive potential, and pitched a revitalization strategy that secured a 6-figure retainer. It was a huge risk, but it paid off. Her boss, a man named Richard with a shiny scalp and a $3,000 Xenia suit, beamed at her. Paid off is an understatement, Whitney. That move single-handedly made our quarter. You have a killer instinct. Darnell stared into his $22 glass of Cabernet. The dormant account she was talking about wasn't a client. It was the $22,000 bonus he had received for completing the electrical overhaul of the Vanderbilt University Medical Center's new research wing. A brutal 7-month job that had him working nights and weekends. He'd endorsed the check, handed it to her to deposit into their joint savings, and she had spun it into a story of her own corporate genius. It wasn't the first time. His gaze drifted to her sister Brielle, who was sitting next to him, radiating the same smug entitlement. Brielle's boutique clothing store had been a financial black hole for 2 years, yet here she was, wearing a $1,200 Diane von Furstenberg dress, nodding along as if Whitney had just discovered fire. The dinner was in honor of Whitney's promotion to Senior Vice President of Marketing. A promotion, Darnell now understood, built on a foundation of his own grueling labor, 4 years of it. 4 years of massive project completion bonuses he earned for dangerous high-stakes jobs. There was the $12,000 for the emergency generator installation at the downtown data hub, the $18,500 for the Nashville Yards Tower project, and now this. A total of over $70,000 in bonuses, all of which had been absorbed into Whitney's narrative of her meteoric rise. Whitney caught his eye and her smile tightened, a subtle, dismissive curl of her lip. It was a look he knew well. It said, "Just sit there and look presentable. This is my world, not yours." She raised her glass, the crystal catching the low, dramatic lighting. "To my team," she announced, her voice ringing with false modesty, "and to my wonderful, supportive husband, Darnell." The table applauded politely. Supportive, that's what she called him. The silent, invisible partner. The man whose calloused hands funded the very celebration that was erasing him. He felt a cold, hollow space open up in his chest. Then, she turned her gaze directly to him. A cruel glint in her eyes he'd pretended not to see for years. The table was quiet, watching them. "I know I don't say it enough, Darnell," she began, her voice dripping with condescension, "but I appreciate you. You've been a steady presence, a good man to have around while I built my career." Her words hung in the air, each one a small, sharp stone. Her father, a man who measured worth in stock options and country club memberships, cleared his throat. "He's a lucky man, Whitney. You're a rocket ship." Whitney laughed, a sound that was sharp and metallic. She looked back at Darnell, her face unreadable for a moment before it settled into a mask of pure, chilling honesty. "Oh, Daddy, don't be silly." She looked around the table, at her boss, her sister, her parents, all the people who mattered in her world. Then her eyes landed back on Darnell, and she delivered the final devastating blow. "I never loved you," she said, her voice conversational, as if discussing the weather, "and everyone at this table knows it." The silence that followed was absolute. It was heavier than the expensive food, thicker than the perfumed air. Darnell could feel every eye on him, a mixture of pity, embarrassment, and morbid curiosity. He saw the flicker of triumph in Brielle's eyes, the uncomfortable shift of his father-in-law, the cold, clinical assessment from Richard. Whitney just sat there, her expression unchanged, as if she had just commented on the floral centerpiece. She'd stripped him bare in front of everyone, not with anger, but with a casual, brutal indifference that was far more destructive. He was not a husband. He was a placeholder, a pity project, a stepping stone she was now finished with. He felt the blood drain from his face, the room tilting slightly. He was a ghost at his own execution. What story will Darnell tell himself to get through this night? So many of us have faced a moment where the story we believed about our lives turned out to be a lie. If you've ever had to find the strength to start over, let us know in the comments how you found your way through. Your story could be the light someone else needs. The house in East Nashville felt different when he walked in that night. It was a modest triplex he and Whitney had bought 5 years ago, before her ambition had metastasized. They lived in the main 2-bedroom unit, renting out the other 2 apartments. It was supposed to be their starter investment, but while Whitney's career had soared, they had somehow never managed to save enough to move. Now he knew why. The money hadn't been saved. It had been spent. On her life, her image, her lie. The worn floorboards, the faint scent of the lemon cleaner he used, the solid weight of the oak front door. It all felt more real, more his, than the sterile glass-walled condo in Green Hills she was always talking about buying. That was her dream. A $430,000 status symbol. This little triplex, with its scuffed baseboards and a garden he tended out back, was his reality. He remembered the day they closed on it. He was 33, making a solid $55,000 a year. Whitney was an account manager then, pulling in about the same. They were a team, or so he thought. "We're building a future, Dee," she'd said, her head on his shoulder as they stood in the empty living room. The afternoon light, golden and warm, streamed through the windows. He had believed her. He had believed in the we. The first big bonus came a year later. A data center in Cool Springs needed a complete electrical refit on an impossible timeline. The company that won the bid was desperate for a senior electrician to lead the crew. Darnell took the job. For 3 months, he worked 14-hour days, sleeping in a cheap motel near the site from Monday to Friday. He'd come home on weekends, exhausted, his body aching, his hands raw. Whitney had been sympathetic, but distant. She was busy with her own big project at work. The job was a success. His company landed a massive long-term contract, and his boss handed him a check for $12,000. It was more money than he'd ever seen in one lump sum. He came home, buzzing with excitement, and laid the check on the kitchen counter. "We did it," he said, pulling Whitney into a hug. "We can finally fix the roof on this place and put the rest toward the Green Hills Condo Fund." Whitney had looked at the check, her eyes gleaming. "This is amazing, babe." She'd kissed him a quick, dry peck on the cheek. "Let me handle this. I'll deposit it into our high-yield savings account. It'll grow faster there." He'd watched as she took a pen and wrote, "For deposit only," on the back, right below his signature. It was a joint account after all. He trusted her completely. 2 weeks later, at a dinner with her parents, he heard the first version of the story. "I managed to turn a challenging quarter into a major win," she'd announced over dessert. "I identified an under-leveraged asset and secured a new stream of revenue. It's a real feather in my cap." She'd smiled at Darnell. "Darnell's been so supportive while I was burning the midnight oil." He had frowned, confused, but said nothing. He thought he must have misunderstood. The idea that she would so brazenly claim his money as her own work was too absurd, too monstrous to comprehend. He had made a critical mistake in underestimating the depths of her deception. The pattern repeated itself. The next year, it was an $18,500 bonus for retrofitting a historic hotel downtown with a state-of-the-art emergency power system. It was dangerous work, involving asbestos abatement and navigating century-old infrastructure. He came home with burns on his forearms from a minor arc flash. Whitney had sighed, annoyed, when he'd asked her to help him change the dressings. "Darnell, I have a huge presentation tomorrow. Can't you manage?" He'd managed. And when he got the bonus check, he'd again handed it over. This time, the money went toward a down payment on her white BMW 3 Series, a $43,000 car she insisted she needed for her image. "We need to look successful to be successful, Dee," she'd explained. The story she told her friends was that her performance bonus had been so large, she decided to treat herself. He was again the supportive husband cheering from the sidelines. The cruelty escalated in private, in 1,000 small cuts. He'd come home, his work clothes stained with grease and drywall dust, and she'd wrinkle her nose. "Could you please use the back door and shower before you walk on the new $2,400 rug?" His hands, the instruments of his trade, were a source of her disgust. "Can't you do something about those calluses? They're so rough." She'd say it with a little laugh, as if it were a joke, but her eyes were cold. Her sister, Brielle, was her echo. Brielle would visit, sweeping into their modest home like a duchess, her eyes cataloging every perceived flaw. "Whitney, I don't know how you live like this," she'd say, running a finger over a dusty shelf. "It's so quaint." Then she'd look at Darnell. "You're lucky she has you. A man who's good with his hands is so useful." The word hung in the air, useful, like a tool, like a wrench or a screwdriver. Not a partner, not a husband. The public humiliations were worse. At a Christmas party for her marketing firm, held at the opulent Hutton Hotel, Whitney was surrounded by her colleagues. Darnell stood at the edge of the circle, holding a drink, wearing his best $400 suit that felt like a costume. He listened, frozen, as Whitney recounted in vivid detail the challenges of the Vanderbilt Hospital project. She talked about navigating the complex stakeholder demands, the tight deadlines, the unexpected structural issues. She used the exact phrases Darnell had used when he'd vented to her over the phone late at night from the job site. "It was a logistical nightmare," she said, shaking her head with theatrical exhaustion. "But my team and I pulled it off. We launched the campaign on time, and the client was ecstatic." Her boss, Richard, had put an arm around her. "That's our Whitney, always turning lead into gold." Darnell felt invisible, his own life, his own sweat and risk, being narrated by his wife as a chapter in her grand success story. He had looked at her, hoping to catch her eye, to see some flicker of acknowledgement, of shared history. Instead, she glanced past him, her focus entirely on Richard. In that moment, he wasn't her husband. He was just a man in the background of her victory photo. The outrage began to accumulate in his chest, a slow, burning pressure. He told himself he was being sensitive. He told himself he was misinterpreting things. He loved her, and love required trust, didn't it? He had no idea how wrong he was. The final betrayal was the promotion. The dinner at Kane Prime was the culmination of it all. The $22,000 bonus from the Vanderbilt job, which she had framed as a client retainer, was the cornerstone of the portfolio she presented to the board. It was the killer instinct Richard had praised. It was a complete fabrication, a lie so audacious that it had become her truth. And as she sat there after gutting him with her words, she looked utterly, placidly content. But something had happened at that dinner. A small, strange detail he'd almost missed in the shock of it all. After her devastating pronouncement, the waiter had returned to the table. He had leaned down and spoken quietly to Brielle. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but your card was declined." Brielle had flushed a deep, ugly red. "That's impossible. Run it again." Whitney had waved a dismissive hand. "Don't worry about it, sweetie. Technical glitch." She'd looked at Darnell. "Darnell will get it." It wasn't a question. It was a command. He had taken out his own credit card, his simple, no-frills Visa, from his local credit union, and paid the $1,874.50 bill. As he signed the slip, his phone, which he'd set to silent, buzzed on the table. A single, persistent vibration. In the haze of his humiliation, he hadn't looked. He just wanted to get out of there. Now, standing in the quiet of his own home, the memory of that buzz returned. He pulled his phone from his pocket. It was a 2021 Google Pixel 6, a practical $600 phone, not the latest $1,200 iPhone Whitney and Brielle flaunted. There was one unread email. The sender was a name he didn't recognize. Marcus Thorne. The subject line made the breath catch in his throat. Urgent inquiry. Joint account activity. Account number. XXXX. His heart started to pound, a heavy, frantic rhythm against his ribs. He opened the email. It was from the Fraud and Risk Investigation Unit at SunTrust Bank. "Mr. Darnell Jackson, my name is Marcus Thorne, and I am a lead investigator with SunTrust's Internal Fraud Division. We are conducting a review of unusual activity on the joint checking and savings accounts held in your and Ms. Whitney Jackson's names. Specifically, we have flagged a series of large, regular cash transfers from your savings account to a third-party account belonging to a Ms. Brielle Shaw. These transfers, totaling over $78,000 in the past 24 months, are inconsistent with your account's history. Additionally, several large deposits into the savings account, categorized by the secondary account holder as client retainer payments, correspond directly with payroll bonus disbursements from your employer, Jackson Electrical Contractors. We have reason to believe these funds may have been deliberately miscategorized. Your phone number was flagged for contact after miss. Shaw's debit card, linked to the receiving account, was declined this evening at 8:17 p.m. due to insufficient funds, triggering a risk alert. Please contact me at your earliest convenience to discuss this sensitive matter." Darnell sank onto his worn, comfortable $800 sofa. He read the email again and again. The pieces clicked into place with a sickening finality. The declined card, the client retainer payments, the transfers to Brielle. It wasn't just that Whitney had stolen his stories. She had stolen his money, all of it. She had used their joint account as her personal slush fund to bail out her failing sister, all while building a career on a throne of lies. The humiliation from the dinner table curdled into something else. Something cold, hard, and sharp. It was the feeling of a switch being flipped in a dark, silent room, illuminating everything in a harsh, unforgiving light. The woman he thought he loved didn't exist. She never had. He was married to a stranger, a con artist, and she had made a critical mistake. She thought he was a simple man. She thought he was weak. She had no idea what was coming. The next morning, Darnell woke up at 5 a.m., his internal clock wired for the early start of a job site. For a moment, everything was normal. The quiet hum of the refrigerator, the first pale light of dawn filtering through the blinds. Then the weight of the previous night crashed down on him. The email, the dinner. Whitney's voice saying, "I never loved you." He felt the familiar pang of hurt, but it was distant now, muffled by a new, chilling clarity. He was no longer a victim. He was a man with a purpose. He got out of bed, moving silently. Whitney was still asleep, a serene smile on her face, lost in dreams of her own success. He looked at her, this woman who had shared his bed for 7 years, and felt nothing. The love had been hollowed out, leaving only a vast, cold emptiness. He went into the kitchen and made coffee, his movements precise and deliberate. He wasn't just making coffee, he was starting his new life. He sat at the small kitchen table with his $89 Timex watch next to a steaming mug and his phone. He reread Marcus Thorne's email, transfers totaling over $78,000, his bonuses, his sweat, his risk, his aching muscles, all siphoned away to fund Brielle's vanity project, her failing boutique. Whitney hadn't just erased his contribution, she had actively stolen from him to prop up her sister. He had to play this perfectly. He couldn't let her know that he knew. Not yet. The element of surprise was his only real weapon. He needed more than just the bank's email. He needed his own proof, his own story to tell. When Whitney finally emerged from the bedroom at 7:30 a.m., wrapped in a $300 silk robe, she looked refreshed and entirely unbothered. She saw him at the table and offered a small, tight smile. "Morning," she said, her tone breezy, as if she hadn't detonated their entire marriage just hours before. Darnell looked up from his phone,